I'm wondering if there's any thoughts you can share about whether you think invoking the Holocaust is appropriate in discussing what's going on in Xinjiang, or if you think that's something that pushes us too far in a direction that we don't want to go big picture.
I think it's really important that you bring that up. I think it depends on what you're using that information for. So about 7 years ago, there was a major scandal with Bloomberg News where they killed a story critical to high levels of the party. And Matthew Winkler, the editor-in-chief at the time, compared the situation in Beijing to Nazi Germany in the 30s and said, as a result, they had to pull the story. This is problematic for two reasons. One, I was in Beijing at the time. That was certainly not the climate. You're allowed to have whatever opinion you want, but that was an inaccurate reading of the situation. The second is that if it's as bad as Nazi Germany in the 30s, why are you there in the first place? Why are you listening to the Nazi government telling you what to do? So I think when it comes to, I think there's China and then there's Xinjiang with this. The situation in Xinjiang is absolutely atrocious. It might be a lot worse than we think. It's very difficult to get that information out. And I think it's useful because we don't want to stay silent for this. And I think as we navigate how we manage our relationship with China, we don't want to think, oh gosh, if I make this comparison, I might not get a visa, or I might have a harm in this business deal or I'm trying to do, or I might be less influential. And I think we just want to be able to say what we believe. And we're not always going to be right, but we're not doing this so that we're pleasing Beijing. We're doing this because we want to share our opinions and we want to exert change and exert influence and have these conversations. So I think the more we talk about it, the better.
I mean, I would say on that question, I think it's one of these situations where certainly I think looking at it as a pre-genocidal situation, and again, as Isaac said, we're not really sure exactly the scale of the deaths, for example. One of the other areas I've done a lot of research on is actually the persecution against people who practice Falun Gong in China. And that's been going on for 20 years. And an article I recently wrote actually found that 4 officials that are playing a key role in what's happening in Xinjiang have basically been running these same kind of transformation campaigns against people who practice Falun Gong in other parts of China. And one of the findings from a report we did on religion in China was that there is very credible evidence that people have, prisoners of conscience, have been killed for their organs to be used in organ transplants. And it's a really complicated technical explanation, and I'm happy afterwards to explain why I think that this is the case. And I think when you look at what's happening in Xinjiang on that background and some of the circumstances, it's really scary. It's really scary because they've got the massive biodata. Basically what they do in China is they reverse match organ transplants. People get transplants within a week, within a month. They reverse match them to people in custody or who they otherwise have access to. And those can be, I think it breaks down across a variety of different populations. I think from that perspective, it's maybe a genocide, it's maybe pre-genocidal. I think the tricky thing with the Holocaust, being like an Israeli Jew myself, is that, it's tricky because right now there aren't, thank goodness, 6 million Uyghurs that have been killed in Xinjiang, as far as we know. There are 2 million in concentration camps. So I think looking actually at Germany in the 1930s, is an interesting parallel, or even a little later than that, because you're looking at why are you pulling all these people indefinitely into concentration camps, and what are the risks that they are facing, and at what point does it turn into genocide? And so I think that's a really important question we need to be looking at and thinking about. But I think even more than that is what do we do about it? And I think that's where sanctioning some of the officials involved, both the big names like Chen Quanguo, but some of the other people, it really hits Chinese officials in the pocketbook. They're really afraid of it. That's probably why they're trying to get the Trump administration, the trade war and stuff like that, to not do it. But they really are afraid of it. And it can really make a difference all the way down the chain of command. One of the things we found when we were doing research was that actually even Xi's anti-corruption campaign, because he had purged some of the big tigers who were really involved in some of the, like they were leading the security services. When activists from overseas call local police and try to convince them not to persecute people, like, look, nobody protected Zhou Yongkang. Who's going to protect you? And so these types of situations, there is some wiggle room among local officials. They're all making their own cost-benefit analyses. And the more we can push them in the cost side so that they don't participate in really life and death situations for Chinese people, whether they're Uyghur, or Tibetan, or Falun Gong, or other Han Chinese or Christians, is really an important role and tool that we have in our hands right now.